So perhaps we'll introduce ourselves then. We start with you, Wayne, as our central linchpin.
Peter, I was going to be behind the scenes tonight, but I don't mind introducing myself at all to your guests. Good evening, everybody. I appreciate it's probably not evening where you are, but it is where I am here. My name is Wayne Reid. I'm a professional officer from BASW England. BASW is the British Association of Social Workers, and I'm sure you're aware. And I support the Worcestershire branch. And I'll hand over to our co-chairs of the branch.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Wayne's been a great national advocate, anti-racist advocate for the profession, and written quite a lot as well that you might pick up on. I'll ask Priscilla, perhaps, if you unmute yourself to introduce yourself to us.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Priscilla Day, and I'm joining you from my Indigenous homelands here in northern Minnesota. I am a tribal member from the Anishinaabe tribe here in northern Minnesota. I actually live on my ancestral lands. This land is the land my great-grandmother had, so it's never been owned by non-native people. And so I'm really privileged to be able to have that ongoing connection with my homelands. I was a professor at the University of Minnesota for about 30 years. I'm a professor emeritus now. And my experience was in tribal child welfare, family preservation, and cross-cultural relationships. And I currently do a lot of consultant work, both with tribes, but with public child welfare agencies, to help them work more effectively with tribal members. So I'm happy to join you here today.
Great to have you here. Yeah, and Nomi?
Hello, my name is Nomi Ostrander. My pronouns are she, they. I am also joining you from Minnesota, having lived in Chicago for about 20 years and working as a professor there. I decided to move north so it could be colder. And we're about to get about, I think, 10 inches of snow. So we're ready for winter now. But I am the MSW director at University of Minnesota Duluth. I've had the privilege of working with a number of communities, from people who were gang affiliated when I started my work, and doing a lot of work on gun violence in the United States. I've done a lot of work on gender. Now I'm primarily working around trans and queer issues. I'm also a therapist, so I see a lot of couples and a lot of relationships, and yeah, that's been wonderful. And I think all this work is sort of tied in with community building and trying to work as closely with community as possible to launch this.
Well, our guests online, Shannon, do you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, sure. Thank you so much. I'm from the United States as well. I'm actually a social worker out of Portland, Oregon. My pronouns are she, her. I'm really excited to join. I'm trying to get registered on the Social Work England registration currently. I work right now for the Department of Veteran Affairs in the US. So thank you so much for letting me join to learn more about your branch and what you do. Great
to see you. It's a very informal meeting. We'll be having presentations, just talking without slides or stuff. So do chip in as you want. Yeah, just chip in. Okay. So, Kavanagh J, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi there, I'm Joanne Kavanagh. I'm a practice development lead in Medway in Kent in England, and I recently joined BASW, and I've just seen this discussion. I thought it'd be really interesting to join, so I hope you don't mind me listening in.
Oh, brilliant, well done, Joanne. Chip in, yeah? What a lovely collection of glasses you've got there. Cut crystal, top quality, perfect.
My Irish crystal from my roots.
Irish roots, oh great, yeah. Well, I'm a half Irish too, yeah. So we'll go on. Rebecca L.E., would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, great.
Hi, I'm Becky. I'm currently a social work student at Worcester University, first year. and I've just come here to listen to the discussion and
Well
to
done.
pick up any ideas of, you know, for anything for good practice.
Right. I hear it's a top university, is that correct?
It's the most excellent university, but that I think is due to some of the students, obviously, but also some lecturers who've got some excellent books published.
Right, we have, yeah, good. Well done, Becky. I can see your career taking off. Sharon Jen.
Hi, I'm Sharon Jennings. I work. I'm a visiting lecturer with the Tavistock and Portman. I'm also an independent social worker, and a BASW member. And I saw this session advertised, and I thought, yeah, I think it might be interesting. Some of the work that I do, in as well as outside the Tavistock, is around leadership and management. In social work as well as across the board, and thinking about anti-racism, thinking about cultural, racial, and all forms of diversity. And so, yeah, when I saw this topic, I thought it would be interesting. So thanks for having me.
And thank you. Yeah, I'd just like to introduce ourselves on the table, our name and where we're from.
Yeah, I'm Abdulaziz. I'm Ghanaian and I'm on the MA program.
Yeah, year.
First year.
Abdulaziz. Abdul, yeah.
I'm Kevin Wright. I'm an MA student on the second year at BASW Ambassador for Worcester, and also on different committees for BASW.
I'm Raluca Sabo. Good evening, everyone, and good afternoon, I think.
Good afternoon in America, yeah. 5 hours behind.
Yeah. I'm Raluca Sabo. I'm one of the lecturers in the social work team. Welcome, everyone.
Yeah.
Oh, my name is Lillian. I'm an MA student in my final year, and I'm a member of BASW, originally from Nigeria, but currently studying here in Worcester.
Hi, my name is Oraimi. I'm also from Nigeria. A second year MA social work student, and I'm also a BASW member.
Great.
My name is Mike Skilbeck. I'm a PhD student here at Worcester. Previously, till about 2 months ago, a team manager of the child protection team, and currently now a lecturer at Worcester University.
Okay, Dave.
Yeah, hi, I'm David Popperman, and I'm a lecturer here at the university, and previously I was a mental health social worker.
I'm Sarah Harrison, so I'm co-chair of the Worcestershire Branch, and I've been a social worker for 3 years now. I was a student during the COVID pandemic, and I work with children with disabilities.
Right. I'm Peter Unwin, principal lecturer here. I've been here 20 odd years, and I'm vice chair of this branch, which is like there's I think 15 or 20 local branches now around the country, around England, who all relate to the central body, the British Association of Social Work, and our job is to promote best practice, to shape policy and practice as well. And just great to have an international flavour, because we often only don't see beyond the end of our proverbial nose, really. Although increasingly we're in a multicultural society. Worcestershire and Hereford, for those of you who don't know, I know Priscilla has been here because the university has had some links in the past with the University of Duluth. Priscilla's been on our fair campus, but we're a very white area. Hinterland, very rural, white British, although just 30 miles away, Birmingham, we have the most multicultural, I think next to London, the most multicultural. I can't remember how many different nationalities and cultures are there, but it's very, very multicultural. So our students, even if they come from a very white ethnocentric background, will be working with lots of different cultures. And what's brought this meeting to a head, we kind of choose our own topics of interest and discuss them, was really the numbers of African students who in recent years have come to study with us. And Raluca has recently had a support group to try and encourage those students to be more successful and introduce them perhaps to some of the nuances and subtleties of coming from a totally different culture and operating under the regulatory strictures, should we say, rules and regs of British social work, and issues such as safeguarding risk, boundaries, morals, sexuality, faith, emotional involvement, all those kind of areas. It's difficult to prescribe, and she's been and Raluca's been working well with that group. We've got another African student with us, Noma, who just appeared and probably disappeared. She might be in the view section, but the way we're going to run today is we're going to have Priscilla, if you wouldn't mind giving us the first 10 minutes, then Nomi, then Lillian, then Mike, then Raluca, and then we'll have 10 minutes or so at the end for a question and answer. But please don't be shy. It's not a formal meeting. There's no wrong questions. This is a safe space. Talk about what you will. Use the words you think are right. And if they're the wrong words or they upset somebody, then hopefully the ambience is such that we'll say to you, that word makes me uncomfortable. So try and do it in a very positive a spirit of global social work, really, because social work is a global organisation. We have an international federation, which I imagine the states affiliate to in some way or the other, that tries to promote similar values across the world. But obviously the context of the world, if you're doing social work in the Gaza Strip or in Minnesota or in sub-Saharan Africa or Birmingham, England or Birmingham, Alabama, quite different. And we're just trying to tease out that question about what are the challenges of working in different cultures, in different countries. So without further ado, and here's Noma on the screen now, nice to see you. We'll ask Priscilla to give her 10 minutes of her wisdom on this topic.
All right. So I don't know about wisdom, but I'm happy to share with you my experience. So in the United States, it's a little different because what from my culture's experience, the non-natives were the immigrants, right? So we have over 572 tribes that are recognized by the federal government as being sovereign nations. And each of those tribes has its own governance structure and ways of being. And some tribes were able to retain their native traditions, languages, family structures, those kinds of things. And other tribes haven't. So a lot of my work has centered around working with tribes to decolonize kind of Western practices that they were kind of forced to take on because of laws and policies and just discriminatory practices. So I think, from that kind of unique perspective, and I want to be upfront about that. And I think it's really important that as individuals, we all understand our background and where we come from and the kind of lens we bring to the work that we do with others, as well as in our own communities. So as I was thinking about being here today, I was looking at the words of somebody who's in charge of our Children's Bureau here in the United States. She's the Associate Commissioner at our Children's Bureau. And so this month, she's an African American woman. She said, our lives are enhanced and sometimes forever changed by the privilege of being in a position to visit with, listen to, and learn from people who are different from ourselves, who have distinctly different experiences. And, I think that's the value that, embracing diversity and equity and inclusion, or whatever you choose to call, this global mix of communities that we engage with sometimes, and certainly our students will be engaging in. It's a privilege. And and to recognize we all carry privilege. And I think that's really important. In the United States, we have an organization similar to your BASW. In the United States, it's called NASW. So it's the National Association of Social Workers. And it has, I think, I just looked this up, it has about 120 members across the country. And I'm sure it does some of the same things you're...
Sorry, Priscilla, is that 120,000?
Yes.
120,000, not 120. That wouldn't be many. No.
Sorry. Yes.
Well, you're doing worse than us.
Well, and that's not nearly, the number of people that could be part of that, because it's a volunteer organization. But one of the things the NSW has is a code of ethics. And I don't know if your BASW has a code of ethics.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's
And
strong.
so it's very, they take a very strong stance on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they really talk about social justice, the dignity and worth of the person, and the importance of human relationships, which I think are pretty core social work values. And so that's just kind of like the foundation out of which all of these other activities and practices, I think, grow. So, and this is probably nothing new to you, so I'm not trying to insult your intelligence by talking about this, but for me, these are the things I think about when I think about what we did at our university to help address equity and diversity and inclusion. So, we all have our own individual values and life experiences. Some of us have more historic trauma and kind of contemporary oppression issues to deal with than others. We all have some level of unconscious bias. So there's that individual perspective that we bring to this work. And then there's the perspective of our organization. The organization's values, behaviors, structures that really sometimes allow discriminatory behavior to occur. And sometimes it's not even conscious because it's so embedded within the structure. And then we have that societal level. And that too brings to bear those kind of values and structures and laws and governance and things that can help support privileging one group over another. So for me, I was a student at the university I later ended up teaching at. And so I had both that student experience, but also my faculty lens. And so I would always try to consider and be aware of the things I experienced, but also what other Native students we refer to students of color for diverse populations, but students who come with just diverse perspectives. What are they experiencing when they apply to the program? What do they see that makes them want to apply? What's it like to actually come on campus, to have to register, to apply for financial aid? Does it feel safe to be on campus? Is it welcoming? And those are all things as a student that I experienced. And for example, when my first semester as a MSW student, I had a financial aid problem and I was really getting the runaround and I felt very unseen and unheard. And so luckily I had somebody who could help champion my issues and got that situation that I had spent several weeks trying to deal with, dealt with in an afternoon. So those are the kind of things we really want we want to be able to create those environments where people are having, the best kind of experience that they can have. And I think there are a lot of ways to do that. You know, I kind of think about a three-legged stool of having awareness about what is the experience of diverse people, and then what kind of knowledge do we need to bring. And it's our responsibility as the organization to get that knowledge. It's not our students' responsibility to educate us. And then what kind of skills do we need to have to deal with difference? And to look at our standards, our policies, our ways of engaging, and really try to create more equitable environments, which is not necessarily equal, but it's equitable, which might mean some students need additional supports, and that's okay. And so, you know, this is probably a 3-hour conversation that I'm trying to give you in 10 minutes, but really being open to exploring our own cultures and experiences and perhaps privileges, be really vigilant about continuing to learn and grow, really trying to normalize difficult conversations, and then really moving towards co-creating interventions and structures and experiences with those who are impacted most. And I think that takes a lot of, you know, humility. It takes a lot of willingness to sometimes engage in uncomfortable conversations, you know, and what kinds of things can we help provide to students to have, you know, their best experience, to create a safe place and a place where they're going to learn some things that they can take back to their own communities. So that's my very quick 10-minute overview.
Good. Thanks very much. We'll hold questions to the end, but as I'm kind of chairing it, I'll ask a question. One rule for staff and one for the students.
Yeah, that's privileged.
Yeah, I love it. You know, you talk about the three-legged stool. Have you written about that?
I have not written about that, but there are people that have written about that, and if you'd like, I can share some of those resources.
Yeah, interesting model, I think, for us to.
But I think that, yeah, that perspective of, you know, you got to start, you know, with just having some awareness that there's an issue to deal with, right? And then it's about how do you gain knowledge, in particular knowledge from a particular population that you hope to support, and really listening to the voices of those with lived experience, and then creating the structures, right? And ways that help really shift practice to be more inclusive. And their skills, you know, there are specific skills that, you know, we can learn, we can share with our students so they can learn how to work cross-culturally more effectively. And so, yeah, there's a lot of material that's out there about that.
And I think there's resonance there with the work Luca's trying to do. So we'll see when she speaks. But thank you very much. We'll turn now then to Naomi for your 10 minutes of UK fame.
It is definitely hard to follow up Priscilla because there's so much in what Priscilla said that I just want to say ditto what she said. You know, I think I was thinking a bit more about sort of the cross-cultural piece, and I think what are some transferable skills that whether you're learning in Worcester or if you are going to another community to practice. You know, and I think what I come back to is curiosity and humility. You know, because I think even if I'm seeing a client in my office and they come in and they say that they're feeling sad or that they're depressed, I don't know what that means to them in terms of their lived experience of those, of whatever it is that they're experiencing that leads to the conclusion that they are depressed. And so I think that there's a lot of curiosity that has to go into, and it should go into, into this work. And that doesn't necessarily mean making people do the work for you, because I think that one of the great things about the fact that, you know, we carry these mega computers in our pockets, and that's a privileged statement as well, is that you can look up a lot of things, and that doesn't mean that you'll get the answer, but you might get some clues on you know, working with folks or about communities. You know, so if I think about the various communities that I've worked with in Chicago and now Duluth, starting off with being, you know, a white, queer, trans social worker working with people who were involved in gangs and who had been shot and paralyzed in, you know, a very sort of urban center in Chicago. There's a whole lot of bridging that has to happen there. And so I think with that comes a lot of humility that I don't know that community. I think a lot of trust building, certainly a lot of curiosity. There's one other word in there that I forgot already. And I think understanding that even the communities that I'm working in, that they're not monolithic, right? So if I'm talking to somebody who had been shot and paralyzed, their experience may be very different based on whatever gang they might have been in, based on their neighborhood, because one of the things that we learn about gangs and communities is that it really shrinks the city. So for example, I could be in Chicago and I could be 2 miles from downtown, and even at 2 miles, you can look towards downtown. You can see the Sears Tower, which is you know, gone through a number of different name changes now, and people can say, I'm 24 years old. I've been in a gang all my life, and I've never actually been to downtown. And that seems so wild because people expect that it's so easy to get there. You can jump on a bus and get down there. But because of gang lines, or because of what is safe, or now because they might be using a wheelchair because they've been shot and paralyzed, buses may not stop, services may not be available. That so much of their lives have changed. And I think there's a curiosity that we have to bring into those situations, about humility and really trying to earn people's trust just by being human, right? Like, you know, I think there can be, like, we bring so much of ourselves into this work. And I think that people who we are working with know if we are being just human beings, or if we're, you know, trying to spout out what we've learned in textbooks. Not that you would ever do that at Worcester. So I think that there's a lot of figuring out sort of where our humanity is in this process, and again, coming with curiosity and non-judgmentalness in there. But so going from a community like that to then working with queer and trans folks, where it's a very different experience. And you know, I worked for probably 15 years with queer and trans communities in Chicago. Now I'm up in Duluth working with the same communities, and it's very different, right? The resources are different. The level of transphobia or homophobia is very different because there's a lot of rural communities around Duluth. And so the situation has totally changed. And part of my work is learning that community, then, and sort of learning what the aspects of the community are that impact the experience of somebody. And again, it changes. And I think that this is the part that if there's a message that I want to drive home is part of understanding that it's not a monolith, right? That it's not each community, there's so many different experiences in there. And even if you know a community, I don't know that you know sort of every aspect of it. So I'll often talk about like transgender communities, or knowing that there's just very different based on intersections of race, ethnicity, queerness or transness, all sorts of pieces. Yeah, I think that's, I have a shorter talk perhaps, but I think those are the pieces that are really sort of resonating with me as we think about this. And you know, our timing for this event is nice because I think yesterday was World Social Work Day, so we're right on cue with that. I will also apologize, and this is also unfortunately right on cue. I may have to duck out a little bit early because we're sort of scrambling a bit to preserve making our programs as accessible and as possible for our tribal communities and rural communities around here. A little pushback from administration, all sorts of fun stuff that happens. So I may have to duck out a little early. Apparently we're having a little strategy session, but I'll stay as long as I can.
Sure, thanks very much, Nova. Yeah, it's great to have the International Day today, given it is, I thought it was World Social Work Today. I think Worcestershire Council are having a World Social Work Week, and I did speak with a gypsy, English gypsy, a traveller person. You might use the expression gypsy, you might use the expression Roma, who are our biggest ethnic minority in Herefordshire and Worcestershire. And we spoke to 30 or so social workers about similar issues, about getting to know the communities, because we take their children away and we make assessments on the mental health of their adults, but we don't know the communities. And unfortunately, in British social work, we often don't spend any time getting to know the communities. Social workers often don't live in the communities. Sometimes there's good reason for that, but often there's not. And they have really no interest. We don't have a strong curricular bias towards community work, whereas it used to be that we did have, indeed when I qualified back in 70, whatever, you did an initial year generic, and then you chose to go the community strand, community development worker, or the caseworker. But nowadays, as social workers in statutory Britain, it's very much casework rather than community work, and it's interesting to hear, you know, differences from across the world.
So if I may, I want to just jump in one other thing, and this was the part that I remembered from Priscilla's talk. You know, I think as we talk about sort of goals of our institutions and things like that, we also have a lot to answer for in terms of the goals of social work and the history of social work and the trauma that social work has caused, you know, throughout the years. And I know U.S. social work best, right? And you think about as, you know, as enshrined as we have for Jane Addams, you know, there was a lot of decisions made there and programs that, you know, certainly were not based in the community. So I think it really raises a question for a lot of the work we do of trying to figure out who is setting these goals that we're working towards, like who is setting this as success? Has the community been part of that? And, you know, should this be our marker of success? And I think like we have, you know, so much trauma around boarding schools in this country for Indigenous folks. And I think that was sort of another one of those pieces where it's who's setting the goals, and of course, a whole lot of other abuse.
Yeah. Yeah, again, that's a theme that resonates in England. Does somebody sit in government in London and say, these are your targets, these are the goals, or do we co-produce those goals and standards with members of the community? And often we don't. So thank you very much. We'll now turn to a view from Nigeria, and ask Lillian to speak.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak and participate in such a discussion. For me, when I saw the topic, I was reflecting on it, and I felt that, yes, social work skills are transferable, because it's easy to simply assume that these skills are universal. I mean, everybody's talking about communication skills, all the values and everything. It's the same wherever you choose to practice. But I think there's more to that, because we're considering cultural differences as well, looking at legislation, policies, and those cultural dynamics. What is acceptable to me from my perspective and my experience growing up and working in Nigeria, it's obviously different from what it is here in the UK. And within the last 18 months or so of my studies, particularly going on placement, I've discovered a lot of such differences, which we are always willing to share during lectures with our colleagues and lecturers who sometimes have not heard some of these things before. And I think this goes a long way in shaping the policies and educational model of social work practice and standards globally, because I think our contributions would go a long way to help social workers in England and Wales or wherever we are to understand these dynamics, because they have service users from all over the world. The world is changing globally and there's a lot of migration going on. So I reflected on the skills that I saw differences in, which I'd like to share, because I think looking at these examples will help everyone in the room to understand what we're talking about here. Particularly for this university that has recruited a lot of African students lately, what is it like for these African students? How are we feeling as upcoming social workers in the UK? So I'm going to be giving up examples of some skills and values that I've actually reflected on, and I see a lot of differences, and just to create that awareness of what social workers coming from this part of the world and working in a Western country will have to reflect on. So one example is communication skills. We know that this is important because, of course, for you to be able to advocate for your service user or to support them with their well-being or whatever needs they need, you're going to support with, you need to understand. Communication is important and crucial for you to understand these things. And it's not all about language. It goes beyond the language to even non-verbal communication and things you may do that will hinder the effectiveness of your contact with the service user. So, for example, I discovered here in the UK that eye contact is very important for people when you speak with them. This is not something that somebody coming from an African background would take as important at all in any way. As a matter of fact, it's considered rude to look at an adult in the eyes when you're talking. So maintaining eye contact with somebody who is older than you is considered an insult in Africa. Whereas we're coming to a place where it will be considered as being insincere or dishonest. So these are the kind of things we're talking about. What will it be for me if I walk into, if I go to support a British family and they're expecting me to maintain that eye contact, and I come in as a social worker because of my African background, I want to respect the elders and look down. Or the child is looking at me straight in the eyes and I'm like, this child is rude. Whereas the child has been trained to look at me that way. So these little differences and all that. And then not just for communication, and that example I looked at is empathy. The way we communicate empathy, because it's not just for you to feel you have empathized with somebody. Does the person actually feel it? Have you created an empath? Does the person perceive that you're communicating empathy? And over here, for example, if somebody was sharing grief or experience of loss with me, it would be expected I should just listen quietly, nod and all that. But in African culture, I'll be expected to actually touch the person and give a tap on the back, which we wouldn't bother if somebody was doing it, if the opposite sex was actually, touching and communicating empathy that way. But with a social worker coming from an African background and doing that in Britain, we considered to be, sexually harassing the service user. So this kind of issues. And then also another example is respect, which is a value that we must have for our individuals that we work with. So from an African background, respect is supposed to be for people who are older than you. Or here I'm being taught to respect the child I work with. However, I think that generally the social work education standards, the training have been designed in such a way that they help us to develop these skills so that we reflect. So critical reflection in practice helps us to put away our personal values, our personal ideas or beliefs, and then to put up that social work cap, which I think if you do that, it's easy to adapt globally, because generally if you're able to follow the standards of what we're trained to do, then it doesn't matter where you're coming from or what your beliefs or values were. It may be easy. I'm saying may because we all have our unconscious bias, as Priscilla was saying. So those things are there. However, I'd like to conclude that recruiting globally actually helps every country or jurisdiction to develop their own practice. Because unless the University of Worcester, if not that they had recruited this number of Africans, we wouldn't have been discussing this topic. And I won't be sitting here giving these examples. People might never know. But sitting here gives us that opportunity. And then, of course, it also facilitates research, which better gives us that awareness and cultural competence to effectively work with the people that we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Some very good practical advice there as well, I think. Certainly one of the things I've noticed is the emotional component of African students' writing, where they talk in very emotional terms about the people they're working with. And in England, the UK, we're much more detached as social workers. A lot of social work in much of Africa actually means provision of shelter, provision of food, the basics of where social work started, whereas social work in Britain has become a much more bureaucratic, distanced, authoritative role, and showing kindness and sharing grief and touch kind of become no-go areas. And we should challenge that. We should learn from some of our African colleagues about the way they live their lives. But great insights. Thank you very much, Lillian. I'm sure people have questions about that later.
Yeah, well, I just want to comment that so much of what you just talked about is very similar in the American Indian community, because we value our elders. We're taught to respect our elders. We give deference to our elders. The whole eye contact thing is the same. Even in how you might shake a hand, Native people tend to have what non-natives call a weak grip. But for us, we're offering our hand to you. We're not trying to compete with you, or we don't want to show strength or that we're overpowering. So all of those cultural nuances make a huge difference. And unless you understand that, that can really lead to cultural misunderstanding and not good outcomes for people we're working with. So I loved what you were saying. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Priscilla. Okay, then we move on now to Mike, who's one of my PhD students, looking at the role of men in social work, particularly in domestic violence work. But he's going to talk to us today about experiences he had in a local authority setting where they employed, because there's a big recruitment crisis in British social work and many vacancies, where they employed people from, I think, South Africa, Mike will tell us, and the issues that flow from that in terms of cultural difference and fit.
Yeah, sure. So I worked for what we call a MASH team, so a multi-agency safeguarding hub. So essentially it's the front door for children's services, child protection. And 2 years ago, the local authority developed what they call the development hub. So they brought over 24 Nigerian social workers. Some of the guys had experience in social work practice before, some hadn't, and part of their involvement here was they also enrolled into a master's course, which they worked alongside their placement, so like an apprenticeship scheme essentially. Now, everything you were saying was absolutely echo everything you talked about around sort of the cultural nuances around communication skills. And what I found as a team manager was all of the guys coming in had such sort of passion and drive to keep learning the new laws, the new legislations. And what we probably failed at as a local authority was picking up on maybe some of those other things around communication and threshold, I think, was our biggest sort of barrier where some of the guys came over and.
Can I just interrupt, Mike?
Yeah.
Guys, are they men or men and women?
Oh, men and women, sorry.
Men and women.
What's the slang? I do
It's an Americanism, Priscilla.
Yeah, sorry.
Men and
at
women.
24, there were 6 male social workers. Okay. So for everyone that was there, what happened was, I think there was probably rushed into practice. There was a 6-month period where it was very heavy study, and it was case right. This is UK legislation. This is law. This is our ethics. This is our values. These are our theories of learning and social work theories. And it did touch upon communication skills, but then it was very much of a focus. And I think this is where they probably failed was, as you said, recruitment and staffing is issues in some local authorities. So what happened was they put all these guys into practice straight away. As I started off doing maybe a month shadowing, and the guys going out and they were working with other social workers. But then it was a case of, right, okay, you could start working. And what happened was some of the social workers going out on their placements weren't necessarily having the same thresholds as we thought. And it became apparent very quickly that what some of the Nigerian social workers thought was a level of risk was quite low compared to what the UK social workers were thinking. And there were instances where families were being seen, cases were looking to be closed quite quickly, but because of the apprenticeship role, the supervising social worker would have the final overview, and then when they started to go through all the home visits and the discussions with professionals, they realised actually there was some really concerning things happening, and it was due to it was a cultural difference. It wasn't they didn't believe that there was the risk was there. It's just the level of what they thought the risk wasn't at the level that the UK social workers were. So I think there is a real big gap there between bridging, I think, our thresholds between sort of African, whatever the culture is that we're coming in. I think whether it's Romani Gypsy, whether it's American, whatever it might be, there's a bridge that we need to fill where we're actually looking at our thresholds. It's okay having our values and our ethics, and this is the law, but if we don't know what our thresholds are between us, that's where the gaps are going to appear, and unfortunately, children, families may suffer quite significantly. So what we had to do was actually we had to sort of intervene quite urgently and bring the guys back out of that frontline practice and go back to a more shadowing experiences with experienced social workers. So rather than working cases on their own, they then budded up. There was a buddy system, and that worked a lot better. But I think when you talked about the communication, that really resonated, especially when you think about the use of touch. So yes, I'm doing my PhD on men in social work, working with victims of domestic abuse. And actually I spoke to some of the male social workers, and it was really interesting, their perspectives around what they considered domestic abuse and what was culturally acceptable, especially when it came to chastisement with children, around what was acceptable. There was some very clear differences, and it wasn't that, like I said, it wasn't that when the social workers wanted to advocate for maybe the physical chastisement this child was experienced, or the respect between the male and the female in a relationship. It was a cultural difference. That's all it was. And until we had to literally say, this is why we were worried about this. This is why in UK culture, UK legislation, it's not okay to smack your child and leave a mark. It's not okay for whether it's the male or the female to experience domestic abuse or coercive control. And these were aspects that just weren't taught on that induction at the development. It was very much focused on legislation, policies, value and ethics, rather than thresholds. So I think it's really important, like I said, if we're going to keep moving forward, which I think we should. And there's so much to learn from both cultures, absolutely. The use of touch is something that's really important. And for me, as a female worker, it's probably much easier for you, whether it's an African culture or UK culture, to show that physical, emotional touch to somebody that's upset than it is to a male social worker, because you do have those imbalances still. So I think, build up on our emotional intelligence but also understanding sort of your unconscious bias, your social graces. So I think, maybe sort of systemic practice needs to come in a bit more in the training and development of social workers from other cultures, so we can actually understand where their values are, what is acceptable, what is their social norms, what were their lived experiences, so you can start bridging those gaps before something happens that maybe can't rectify because it's too late. Yeah, that's pretty much it for me.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And did they keep those Nigerian social workers on, or did they?
Yes, yeah, all 24 of the students stayed. I mean, I'm assuming they're still there now. I left at the end of the year, but a few of the guys had to sort of step back from the very front line practice just because of essentially there were concerns around thresholds and the safety of them being able to make those decisions on their own.
It was successful in the end.
Yes, yeah, but there was a lot to. It was the first time they did it. So there was a lot to learn, and I think they learned some of the flaws in the program were learned in quite a steep curve.
And the rush for them to hit the ground running would have been because they get inspected by government agencies who say all these children who are at risk or are not being covered, and the managers want to be able to say they've all got social workers. We've allocated them. They're being dealt with without any real consideration.
And then he's just slowing it down. I think the rush was that it was meant to be a 2-year program for him to come over and do the development of the program. But actually what happened was within 6 months they were in practice. And I think that, it was needs of the service sort of overtook the actual development of the workers.
Yeah. Okay, well, thanks very much, Mike, for that perspective. And certainly I know in the Worcestershire area of examples where good parenting has been interpreted by a white British social worker, say, I think in the case of 2 medical African doctors, as abusive, whereas they were only disciplining their children in the way they would have done in their home African country. I can't remember if it was Ghana or Nigeria or Senegal. And to me, the damage done, they removed the children because of a comment at the nursery from the 5-year-old about daddy hit me on the leg. The damage that was done to that whole family and culture and community and church, because they're quite a big church, was massive. And if the social workers going in would have had a smidgen of common sense, and that would never have happened. This was actually a good. Children got returned, but by then the trauma was done, isn't it? And we can think of I can tell you lots of examples like that from just for lack of cultural sensitivity. And I know we had a debate with Naomi on cultural competence, cultural sensitivity, and he introduced another word, Priscilla, which was something like cultural action or cultural transformation, or as if we need to be moving on to actually change things rather than just be sensitive about it.
Responsiveness, I think, is what
cultural responsiveness.
Yeah,
that was it, which is an interesting construct about where we should be going. Too much talk and maybe not enough action, sort of thing. Anyway, too exciting. Top of the bill then, and the person whose fault it is we're all here instead of down the pub is Raluca, who's going to talk about her personal experience having come here a few years back from Romania in Eastern Europe and practiced as a social worker.
Thank you. I think I didn't realize it's Social Work International Day or World Day, so it comes our meeting tonight. It comes exactly in the right place and the right time. Just to echo what it has been said, I will just share my experience of practicing in East Europe, in Romania, and then coming here as a recruited social worker 15 years ago. And as it has been said, it was a massive shock for me, cultural one, personal. It was a very complex experience. But in terms of how I was transitioned into my practice here, I wish I have been so lucky to have, a time where when to to explore all the ideas and norms and elements around the culture. But my experience was just cases allocated straight away because it was an organizational crisis. We needed to be there and cases to be allocated. So it was, a kind of mechanistic formal thing. So I personally, looking back now, and I'm always very honest and with my students when teaching, I realized I not necessarily did the best thing I could because I felt what I knew and what I learned was not valid and viable anymore. Although we talk here about transferable skills, and now we all know it's about communication, it's about being warm, it's about being honest, it's about being accountable, it's about being there and being genuine and authentic. But it was the pressure of the environment where coming from East Europe, where we grew in a very strong regulated, punitive society, where the first thing I learned was if I'm not doing the right thing, I will be punished. I translated the same attitude here. If I will not do the right thing, I will be sent back. I will lose my employment here. So it was as I said, it was not a transition. It was a shock, and I felt personally frozen for months because I didn't know how to do and what is valid and what is true anymore for me as a professional. Starting with the idea of how I was working before coming in the UK for over 10 years with children and families in with Roma communities, and the only thing I had to offer in a very underdeveloped and underfinanced system was just to be warm and be there because services were not very developed back then. So it was a kind of relationship-based only situation, and this was in the majority of cases all I could offer. Then coming here, it was completely different. It was about the list of the services, the criteria, and the way I should communicate to people, how I should assess the situation as being risky or not, how where the threshold is, and how I should apply it. And I remember staying around children and thinking, I shouldn't touch them, I shouldn't let them climb on me, I shouldn't sit down and play with them. And this was for the first months here, and I felt I was losing my professional persona and what I learned before and what I knew before and valued. As we were progressing into employment, knowing about the British culture and how to deal with situations in this particular manner dictated by the culture here, I became more relaxed, but it took me a while and it was a difficult process. And sometimes, even here at university, after so many years in practice, I feel I don't know actually where I am, where is my home in terms of culture and ideas and habits, and yes, knowledge are everywhere the same, skills are transferable, but where I feel I am, I have days and days. And I think this was the idea which led me to try to pilot this program we are running now, because in the last few years we had more and more international students, and I felt this lived experience of mine could be used in a constructive way, and for me to share. I was in their situation. I felt, alienated and from nowhere, and now not having a clear point of reference. It's very common, and it's part of the adjusting process. So having these discussions with our students starting from last September. It was a fantastic experience for me because I tried to create a space where they can feel they can tell anything, and I'm not there as a lecturer on the program, but as a fellow social worker who went through the same experience of being from a system where the values were so different, in a different system where the things are definitely more organized, but the sanctions are also very strict and clear, because we keep hearing from day one, and this was the first lesson I learned when I came to the UK: cover your back, follow the rules, or you will lose your registration. And I think we need to balance this message and let students bring up, their potential as humans, first of all, and from there to build forward for the professional side, because they are here with a clear motivation, and we know they made a lot of sacrifices, and it's not an easy transition to move to a different country and study in a different academic system. So they definitely have something to offer, and they are keen to build on this.
Great. Thank you, Raluca. So we've been around the world in an hour. That's pretty good. We've been to North America, Europe and Africa. So it's open house now, really. Anybody who'd like to ask any of the speakers any questions, you can say, I'd like to particularly ask this of Priscilla or Raluca. Please just, if you're online, just start speaking. Don't put your hand up or anything like that. Just start speaking. If you're in the room, obviously just start speaking. And we'll have 15 or so minutes discussion if we so wish. Wayne Reid, put his hand up, like, see, follow the rules. No spontaneity.
Now I can follow the rules.
Thank you, Peter. I thought I'd be polite anyway and raise my hand. I just wanted to say, really, on behalf of BASW England, thanks ever so much for all of your presentations. They were all really fantastic, enthralling, got so much from them. Really nice to hear that social work values kind of shared across the world, and I think you all communicated that in different ways. So, yeah, just really, really happy with that. So glad we've managed to record this session as well, and we'll be able to host it on the BASW YouTube channel. So, thanks again.
Thanks, Wayne. Thanks for getting all the tech to work. This is a great thing, isn't it? Thanks, man.
No problem. No problem.
Who would like to ask a second question or pose a point of discussion? Anybody else online? We'll give you the first shot.
Well,
Priscilla,
I'm never at a lack of questions. So, Mike, I as you were talking, I was really wondering about, I think that definitions of safety are culturally defined. And so one of the things that I know is true in the United States is because tribes have sovereignty and some tribes have full authority over their own child welfare programs, they're redefining what safety means. And a lot of them are using concrete resources. They're really trying to separate out what might be called neglect in the United States, away from more, I don't want to say serious, because neglect is serious. I'm not downplaying that. But separating that, and things like that are really related to poverty, like a child having head lice. Now, there are still situations in public child welfare where those children are sometimes removed from their families. That's a public health issue. So how do you define safety? How do you define how do you separate out what is related to poverty, for example, what it might be related to historic trauma, and some of these harsh corporal discipline techniques might have been learned. Actually, they're not part of their traditional community, but they were learned someplace. So for American Indians, they were learned in very harsh boarding schools, right? So these aren't the posh boarding schools. These are boarding schools that all had child cemeteries because the mortality rate for children was so high. And that's the ongoing trauma that's in our community. So how do you try to separate that out or make space for other communities' definitions of child safety?
Yeah. Again, I work a lot with travellers, as I've said, and particularly in Ireland, where a lot of traveller children were put into institutions. There's been similar scandals, and very recently there's been issues of children buried in unmarked graves. The parents didn't know where they were. So it is it's been an international issue. I mean, one hopes it isn't that bad these days, but in different ways, it is still as bad in terms of, if you look at the number of children from ethnic minorities who, for example, come into state care. Poverty, overcrowding, what's seen as neglect, diet, educational levels, these aren't all occasioned by wicked parents. There must be some very big structure. And social work, we do try, I mean, BASW tries as a body to lobby for better conditions for workers and for people using social work services, but it's very difficult without political buy-in. And our more right-wing governments of recent years have not been really pro-social work. Our political leaders don't worry about paying the bills and the kids having head lice and not being able to afford treatment and going to the dentist. You know, our ruling political class are very divorced from the world that social workers know. There's a famous playwright, film director who you may not know in the States, Ken Loach, who's done a series of excellent films. I, Daniel Blake was one of his most famous recent ones. In the foreword to the film, or foreword to a book he wrote, he said social workers should be listened to. They know what's going on in the streets and cities and countryside. So government, listen to social workers. They're also one of the few professions who actually get out there into people's homes. Most of the human services professionals work on appointments and office scenarios. You do not find those professionals seeing families in their context. And sadly, since COVID, more work has been done online than actually being out there visible in the streets and knowing the community and feeling the communities and issues of risk and safety and what have you. So who else has a question to ask?
I mean, just going back to Priscilla's as well, I think one of the things that we can do that would be really effective in trying to understand or bridge those gaps around the thresholds is having some really good reflective supervisions and actually taking that time to discuss case by case as you're working with the students from, whether it's South Africa or whether it's from America, at the initial points during that transition period, if there is one, and you're looking at that, is that key to that reflective supervision. So why did you think that? Why did you come to that decision? Because if you don't ask those questions, you'll never know. It'll just be a process. I've agreed it's section 47 because I think it's child protection law. I think there's no further action. But if we don't discuss reflectively why you came to that decision rather than the process, I think that's the key at the start, really.
Section 47, Priscilla, is a section of the Children Act which governs our safeguarding work in the threshold. Section 47, yeah. Right, anybody else got a perspective here?
I'd like to ask about experiences of children with disabilities in different areas and how that is perceived from a social work perspective.
Disabilities in the African, Lillian?
When you just asked that question, I got chills down my spine. Because only yesterday I watched a video from Nigeria of someone who has a non-governmental organization registered, a charity organization where she supports people with disability. because Africans, in most African cultures, people with disability are seen as people who are demon possessed or have brought some kind of ill luck from the gods. So they are very much ill treated, so to say. What I watched yesterday was the woman actually goes around families picking children with disabilities, and then she has a home for them, so for their well-being. And then that's because some parents don't even mind throwing away their children just because they've got disability. And for some rich families, even though they keep these children, they don't put them as members of parts of their families. So in that video yesterday, she was going to pick a child following a referral. She got a referral from the family had self-referred, asking her to come and pick up their child. And when she got to the house, she saw every member of the family, and they were entertaining her according to African culture, getting food and drinks for her. And she said, "Where's the child you've called me to see?" And they looked at themselves, "Oh, he doesn't live in the main building." So they've got this big duplex where every member of the family stays. Well, the child had been locked up in a seventh corner of the building somewhere, not in the main house. So she requested to see the child, and when she got there, this child was in chains. And she asked why. They said, because he's violent. If you let him go, he's going to hit you, he'll be beating people. But yes, he won't act like that because everybody else has been hostile to him. So they throw food to him, and he's only attended to by the maids because the parents are rich. They don't want that scandal of being seen with a child with disability. So it's something that really needs a lot of work back home. I don't know how we can take our skills from the Western world back home to work with people with disabilities.
So the chaining of disabled people in England 100 years ago would be common. Unfortunately, they're locked away. It still happens, does it? Restraint. Okay. In authorised settings or not?
Not.
Okay. Sarah works a lot with disabled.
Yeah, I'm based in a children with disabilities team.
So in perhaps less visible forms, restraint does
and more
still happen sometimes. Yeah.
acceptable, I guess, from professionals, which for me is very worrying.
Yeah.
I guess the difference is in the fact that here in the UK, the local authorities know that these children are children in need, because by Section 70, every child who is disabled is a child in need, so he gets support from the government. That is not so with these developing countries. Yeah. So nobody really cares. It's about the parent and the child.
Plus that overlay of God's cursed the family and their bad luck omen, which wouldn't be the case in, say, Worcester, the disabled child. But I don't know, how about Native American Indians?
Yeah, so I wrote an article a number of years ago on disability in the American Indian community, and we have a really different way. And so in our spiritual beliefs, everybody came to this physical world from the spirit world with a role to play, and everybody has a gift for the community. And so people with disability are seen as there to teach the family something or to teach the community something. So they're much more integrated. There is just kind of a natural adaptation for what people need. So people go out of their way to really be helpful. Like I wrote about a young woman who had some developmental issues. So she had some physical disability, but she also had some intellectual disability. But she graduated from our tribal college. And that's because people really were willing to partner with her, spend time with her, help her live her best life, because the belief is she has something to offer the community. So it's a really different perspective. And I just wonder, way back before colonization in Africa, if tribes treated their relatives that way, or if that's something they picked up through, colonization practices, slavery practices, to really, treat people differently. So, I'm just curious about what, traditional elders would say, or, if that somehow those traditional beliefs about family and belonging somehow got lost in the colonization process.
There's your PhD for you, Lillian. Yeah, sorting that one out. But what an interesting contrast in attitudes to disability across a Teams meeting, and to how the main paradigm around disabled people in Britain actually is one of rights, human rights. We have quite strong Equality Act. It doesn't always get acted on, but in theory, the disabled people are provided for by the government. Services aren't what they were, but there is a safety net. It may be a low bar or a high bar, as it were, but there is a range of services available to disabled people. And there's still a big disabled persons movement fighting for greater rights. And much of the work we've increasingly embedded in social work education in Britain has been about listening to, respecting, working alongside what we call people with lived experience. And the movers of that movement, if that's the right way to put it, were in fact disabled people and people with mental health issues, who were the flag bearers for the rights movement. That continues to develop to this day, really. So perhaps one or two more questions. Anybody?
I've got one actually.
Mike?
So for Raluca, or any of you guys really, we talked about values and ethics and the differences in cultures. What I found in my practice were some of the other team managers would allocate a Nigerian social worker to the Nigerian family, or a Romanian social worker to the Romanian family, because they thought it would be easier and from a cultural point of view. But if you're having to embed UK social work and it goes against the values or the ethics or the culture of yourself, how would you manage that? Or because you're then challenging somebody from the same culture that you come from, or having the same potential values or ethics that you had, do you feel comfortable in going against the grain as such to do the job? Or do you feel that you would probably want to maybe, that's a way to reduce what was going on in that family to reach the challenge?
I don't think it's really right to breach what's going on in the family or try to hide anything, because at the end of the day, you're concerned about safeguarding well-being of this person. So if you do that and something goes wrong, particularly if a life is lost, you cannot do anything to bring the person back. So I think that would be too much of a risk.
Oh yeah, I did. Yeah, so maybe I said that wrong then. I guess it was more around how would you feel about having to challenge your own culture or your own beliefs before coming to the UK with another Nigerian family? Or
I think again it goes back to that reflective supervision in a safe space.
Yeah,
I'll speak with my manager about what is going on. Try to let them understand from a cultural perspective, this is what is going on for this person, and these are the reasons. However, if it breaches the law, as someone who is legally trained in legal practice, I know that ignorance of the law is no excuse. So if it breaches the law, the service user has to understand that irrespective of the fact that this is your culture, it is allowed from where you're coming from. It's not allowed here, so you can't have your way here. So it's all about balancing, the understanding, creating that awareness. Because there's a level of explanation you will give to an individual. He or she will understand that, yes, what I did was wrong based on where I am. So I think it's all about that balance, and also explaining to the team as well, so that they don't think you're being overly sensitive because the person is from your place.
Interestingly, it was something I thought about. I asked myself that question, that if I do get to practice and I'm giving in Nigerian, how would I let some things go? Would I be like, oh, it's part of our culture? I have questioned that myself. And I think for starters, I probably wouldn't get it at the beginning. I probably would not accept that kind of case at the beginning. I might work, because I thought about it, I was like, I might work with somebody, assist somebody to understand our culture. But I think for me at the beginning, I'm like, I don't think I want to, because I don't think I would have addressed my asses as much as I would have if I've gone so far in practice, then to be able to get that kind of case and be able to work with it. So personally, I would not take it at the beginning. I would offer to work with somebody so that you can understand what we're going through, you can understand how our culture stands, you can understand, or if they do this, it's because it's culturally. Then maybe on a word, because I also want to learn what the other culture is about. So it's just me being open to that.
I don't, yeah, for me though, I think it's three main things: reflection on your awareness, and you being culturally sensitive to the person, and also knowing that you are living and working in a space that's guided by policy. So I'd love to work with a Ghanaian because I know their culture, and like I said, relationship-based approach. It's going to be easy to build that rapport with the person, and help change what's going on. But then again, I'll need to be aware of those things about culture and how am I giving easily to those things. So that's where the reflection comes in.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Personally, I had an experience where I think the fact I was from East Europe helped me to build a relationship where other social workers failed, and the case was a very high level. In reality, it was just because mom was fighting back and she was not following anything because she felt, they were against her. So building this relationship coming from a very common cultural background was useful up to the point where she wanted us to, be us against them. And then she saw me like a traitor of the culture we were both coming from. So, it was very tricky to balance things.
That's a very interesting phrase to use. Must have traitor to your own culture. And perhaps we'll just end on something that brings it to stark focus for me, particularly with our African students. In some parts of Africa, Nigeria would be one, homosexuality is illegal.
Yeah.
Let alone trans and bi and LGBT. The attitudes in Western Europe, or most towards sexuality. So we're expecting, say, a Nigerian student to come over here and within a month, and having been taught and perhaps been brought up in a faith or a religion that holds that homosexuality is a sin, it's a bad thing, and then we're asking you to work in a non-judgmental, person-centred way with a couple who may be a gay couple, or a gay couple want to foster or adopt. That's a massive, how do you ever balance your teachings, your faith, your 20 years plus of upbringing, and your cultural mores and norms from Nigeria, to now be working maybe with children who want to transgender. So to me, that's always it's not an extreme example, it's a real example, particularly with the changing sexualities of Western Europe now, and that's always struck me as a good point of debate. But even in universities these days, we don't debate what we should debate without fear of being sacked. And we've got to challenge that very oppressive. We need to have safe conversations about difficult areas and not be accused. Some students will say to me, well, you can't ask that question, Peter, it's racist. I say, well, what do you mean it's racist? I'm just asking, what would a Muslim person what would their approach be? Because I don't know. I'm not looking to be racist or put you down. I don't know. And to me, it's always been respectful to learn about other cultures. But I think some of those points you've just debated are particularly fascinating, about staying true to yourself, true to your family, true to your culture, but finding a fit somewhere if you've come to another country to work in a way that you can feel sufficiently comfortable with. I mean, social work is not necessarily a comfortable job, being comfortable with the uncomfortable, but how you get that fit and what you do look away from or what you do let go, I think, was what you do. That comes with experience, development, and one of the interesting things that's been through seeing proper reflective practice rather than you're behind your recording and what about this case you haven't felt proper reflective practice, which tends to slip away, is a great arena for trying to address those sticky, wicked, difficult problems. Yeah, and I think we've had a good debate this evening about some of those issues without necessarily solving the world's problems. And I'd like to thank Priscilla, and Naomi's gone off to fight the good fight, I think, with his own management. Thanks to everybody who's joined online, including our friend from the States.